Hope County, Montana, a once strong community which slowly became infested by evil. The Seed family and their doomsday cult, the Project at Eden's Gate. In today's video, we're going to be looking at the origins of each Seed family member: Jacob, John, Faith, and leader of the cult, Joseph Seed. If you enjoy the following, you all know what to do, and if you're new here and aren't subscribed to the channel already, please consider doing so. With that being said, let's begin. The origins of the sadistic Seed family. Before we look at each character, let's begin with a brief history of the Seed household when the siblings were just children. The Seed siblings of John, Jacob and Joseph spent their childhood in a broken home. The family grew up in a poor rundown neighborhood in Rome, Georgia. The brother's alcoholic father, known to locals as Old Man Seed, pulled the two elder siblings, Jacob and Joseph, from school, intending to homeschool them himself. Their mother would turn a blind eye to this, with many believing that she'd been crushed and beaten to nothing by her abusive partner. John, the youngest of the three siblings, would remain in the public schooling system. Teachers at the school would soon see signs that John was the victim of abuse, prompting an intervention by social services. Their father was arrested and charged with the abuse of his wife and children, and sent to prison where he would later perish, their mother unknown. The trio of the Seed brothers would be firstly sent to an orphanage before being fostered by a family residing in a small town not too far from their original home. In this family home, the Seeds would once again be subject to the same treatment as they endured with their biological parents. They were beaten, forced to work the fields, care for themselves, and slept in a barn. Finally reaching their limits, the eldest of the brothers, Jacob Seed, set fire to the farmland in which they resided and knocked out his abusive foster father with an axe handle. Following these actions, all three brothers were diagnosed by psychiatrists as dangerous, especially together, so a separation was put in place. Jacob was placed in a juvenile detention centre for his actions, John was adopted by a family known as the Duncans, and Joseph was sent back to an orphanage, later passing through multiple foster families. So let's take a look at the siblings' time on their own, firstly beginning with the youngest of the trio, John Seed. Following the separation from his brothers, John was adopted by the Duncan family, a highly religious and wealthy family from Atlanta, Georgia. John's miserable upbringing wouldn't end here. The Duncan family considered John's soul to be tainted. They tortured John both psychologically and physically into confessing any and all sins through interrogation and a series of fundamental pastors. John was forced to quickly learn on how to adapt to this. Even if he knew he had no sins to confess, the torture would still come, prompting John to make up false sins just to end the beatings. Through this, he became very skilled at masking his true self and showing a version of himself that his torturers wanted to see. As a result, he became extremely skilled at psychological manipulation, using this skill to acquire secrets about others and being able to use them to his own advantage. It was around this time that John learned just how powerful saying yes was, and would use this motto in life. Growing up, this torture would continue until John left home to attend a prestigious East Coast university where he would study law. John went on to graduate at the top of his class and soon became one of the fastest rising lawyers in Atlanta, Georgia. Following the death of his adoptive parents, John inherited a small fortune. Using both his skills and acquired finances, he became extremely wealthy, making strong connections along the way. John somewhat saw himself as a physical poster of success, but in spite of this, underneath, John felt a strong hatred for himself. He hated society more, as he blamed this for his abusive childhood, often expressing his wanting for its destruction. Although John had grown up religious, he would later give in to the urges concerning intercourse and slowly became addicted to the act. Later in life, whilst John was associated with a major law firm, he would return to his original home in Rome, Georgia, where he planned to redevelop his childhood neighborhood. It was at this time he would reconnect with his older brother, Joseph Seed. John would relocate to Hope County, Montana with Joseph, whom at this point had already formed the Project at Eden's Gate cult, taking on the role of the confessor. As the confessor, John would kidnap and torture the citizens of Hope County in the same manner he received during his time with the Duncan family. His goal? For them to confess their sins. For this, John was handed control of the Holland Valley region of Hope County. After setting the fire to the farmlands of the foster home that the three siblings were at, not to mention assaulting his foster carer, Jacob Seed was sent to a juvenile detention centre. During his time here, he would continue to rebel against those who tried to control his actions and often clashed with the correctional system. Although he was considered something of a lost soul, he would often receive praise for his leadership skills and sense of honour. This may have prompted his decisions when leaving the detention centre, as he would sign up to the United States military. During his time in the military, Jacob would tour both Afghanistan and Iraq as a marksman under the 82nd Airborne Division, where he was decorated several times. During one tour whilst deployed, Jacob and his best friend and fellow soldier, Miller, were shot down and separated from their fellow comrades. The pair were 200 clicks away from their nearest friendly base, in which they were forced to walk. Jacob came to terms with the fact that the duo were never going to make it that far with the limited rations they had, so he chose a drastic action. Jacob not only killed his best friend Miller and took his rations, but he also cannibalized him, ensuring that he had enough supplies to last him on the long journey back. Following this, a medical report given to Jacob's superiors warned of how he was suffering with post-traumatic stress disorder. Jacob was later declared unfit for military service and received a discharge based on medical grounds. Jacob, after running out of funding, would soon find himself homeless on the streets where he grew up. It was at this time that his two siblings, both John and Joseph, would become aware of Jacob's situation and find him. He was brought into the project at Eden Gates cult as a herald, recruiting the civilians of Hope County into their fold using mind-controlling techniques. For this, he was awarded control of the Whitetail Mountains region of Hope County, Montana. Although not a blood relative, Faith is considered the adopted little sister of the Seed family. The name of Faith, in fact, is also adopted, with her real name being Rachel Jessup. Not a great deal is known about Rachel's history, but we do have a little knowledge. Rachel Jessup came from a wealthy family who owned a conservatory in the eastern regions of Hope County. Her father was a doctor who was known for his experimentation with plant life as part of an altruistic effort to help people. Rachel's mother grew orchids in one of the greenhouses located at the atrium. Rachel had a very timid personality and was considered to be naive. Because of this, she fell victim to forms of abuse and later turned to the misuse of narcotics for comfort. She was considered by others as being too nice and would agree with someone as to avoid any confrontation. Rachel was not considered a fighter, even if she felt her life depended on it. Rachel's drug misuse began when she joined up with, alongside her friend Tracy, a free spirit movement somewhere out west, where she would begin with lighter narcotics. Rachel and Tracy would later turn to the more heavier side of drug misuse. Because of this, the members of the Free Spirit movement fell out with the pair, and they were somewhat excluded from the group. The pair returned to Hope County, Montana, where Tracy would join the cult, with Rachel following. Upon meeting the father, Joseph Seed, Rachel would state that he was very welcoming and introduced her to a strict moral way of life without drugs or alcohol, beginning a recovery from her out-of-control addictions. Her friend Tracy soon realised the true intentions of the project at Eden's Gate and left, but Rachel stayed. Rachel immersed herself in the ideology of the cult and was later reborn under the name of Faith Seed. Rachel wasn't the first Faith Seed, as there had been 3 or 4 others before her that upon their demise were simply replaced. We later learned from Faith herself that the tale of how she joined the cult wasn't as clear as first thought. She would later claim that leader, Joseph Seed, would drug her when she was just 17 and make threats against her, but because of her constant drug use, it's not wholly clear as to the exact dealings. Because of her family's history in dealing with plant life and Faith's knowledge of narcotics, she was given the role as overseer of Bliss Production, a mind-controlling drug used to take innocence to a mythical place in her mind. She was given control of the Henbane River territory of Hope County, Montana. The leader of the project at Eden's Gate, Joseph Seed. Before the Seed siblings were taken into care, Joseph would claim that the first time he heard the voice, as he put it, was during one of the many beatings he received from his father, Old Man Seed, or for reading a Spider-Man comic book. After he and his brothers were separated at the orphanage, Joseph Seed lived with a series of different foster families, often moving to different locations. These constant changes made it difficult for Joseph to form connections with not only his current adoptive family, but with classmates at different schools. He was lonely a lot of the time, having no friends that he was close to. As he became older, he would find employment. he worked as a bellhop, which brought in some cash flow, but seemingly not enough, as he was forced to squat at an old packaging plant in his hometown of Rome, Georgia. It was at this time that he would attempt to reconnect with his siblings. He would become deeply invested in religion at this point, attempting to understand the voice, a guidance which had been with him through these years. In search for his brothers, Joseph would move to Atlanta, Georgia, looking for his younger brother John. He would continue to work, taking on jobs such as a garbage collector, but would often lose these positions as he was considered deranged for talking to colleagues and co-workers about the voice. At one point, he took on a role as a caretaker at a psychiatric hospital. As he was heading to shift one evening, he was attacked by 3 men, leaving him beaten and bruised and left for dead. This is when the voice contacted him for one final time. It gave him a vision of an apocalypse on the world that needed to be punished. Joseph Seed had now found his calling. He was to do God's work. At some point, Joseph Seed married a lady named Megan, and the pair bore a baby daughter. Tragically, the mother and daughter were involved in a vehicle collision. Megan was killed in the accident, leaving Joseph and his daughter alone in the world. Whilst at the hospital, Joseph was handed what he described as a pink bundle filled with tubes, his daughter. In the room alone, Joseph heard the voice of God once more, telling him it was time to start the project at Eden's Gate, as the end of the world was upon them. Hearing these words, Joseph then murdered his daughter, pinching one of the plastic tubes that was acting as a breathing apparatus, closing down her oxygen supply. He claimed that this was to prove his willingness to serve God, no matter what God asked of him. After reconnecting with his 2 brothers, Joseph began to preach the word of God to the locals of Rome, Georgia. He did this from a former slaughterhouse. Eventually, he built a considerable congregation from society, earning him a cult-like following, the project at Eden's Gate. The disappearance of one of the members of the cult prompted a police investigation. The Seed family were suspects for this, forcing the cult to relocate to Hope County, Montana. He would use his assets to build the project at Eden's Gate to a considerable size, taking control. With his siblings under his command, it seemed there was nothing that could stop the cult from seizing control of Hope County. This is where the story of Far Cry 5 begins. You've been listening to Phil of Philby Gaming. If you enjoyed today's video, you all know what to do, and if you're new here and not subscribed to the channel already, please consider doing so. If you wish to see more content on Far Cry 5, let me know in the comment section. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.